Friday, The Arapaho Boy by Mark Simmons, illustrations by Ronald Kill. The Arapaho Country and Beyond in 1831. In the language of the Arapaho Indians, his name was Warshinen. In English, that meant Black Spot. At age 9, the small, skinny boy called Black Spot was living with his father, mother, and younger sister in a teepee, or a hide tent shaped like a cone. Usually, the Arapahos moved their teepees over the plains of eastern Colorado and parts of Kansas. They lived by hunting antelope, elk, and buffalo. But this year, the herds were seldom to be found. For 2 seasons, little rain had fallen on the plains. No grass grew. The hungry animals drifted south, looking for something to eat. Black Spot's father, Nisana, took his son's hand and said, "This evening you will go with me to the council teepee. Our elders will meet there. They will decide where we should go in search of fresh meat." The fire burned in the center of the large teepee. The old and wise men of the tribe sat in a circle upon buffalo robes. Black Spot nudged close to his father. He listened for hours to the council talk. Several leaders said that the Arapahos should move south, following the game animals. Beyond the Cimarron River in Oklahoma, their hunters would surely find enough for the whole tribe. Others objected. "The Cimarron is deep in the land of our enemies, the Kiowas and Apaches," they warned. "Our village will not be safe when the young men are out hunting." After much argument, the elders agreed to pull down the teepees at dawn and start south into enemy country. They had no choice. But by the time the decision was made, Black Spot had fallen asleep. By the white man's calendar, it was the last week of May, 1831. The Arapahos had traveled slowly over the blistered plains for 3 weeks. Now they were camped on a sandy flat beside the Cimarron River. Black Spot looked down into the wide bed of the Cimarron. It was nearly dry. Only here and there could he see the shallow pools of water. But he knew there was enough for the teepee village and its large herd of horses. During the first few days on the river, Arapaho hunters brought in a large number of antelope. They also killed an old buffalo bull found alone on the plains. The buffalo meat was tough and hard to chew, Black Spot decided, but at least everyone went to sleep at night on a full stomach. Each morning, the elders sent out scouts to search the wide land for any sign of the Arapahos' enemies. All knew that the tribe was trespassing on the hunting grounds of others. Black Spot was happy here on the Cimarron. As usual, the Arapaho village hummed with activity. He liked to watch the men making arrows and bows of Osage orangewood. When they painted their war shields, he would sit fascinated as the deer hair brushes spread the pretty colors on the thick buffalo hide. Sometimes Black Spot helped his mother, Naina, carrying in firewood from the edge of the river, but much of the day he played wild and free, like other Arapaho children. One afternoon, Black Spot was bored. He took his bow and arrows and began walking up the Cimarron. He was looking for a colony of prairie dogs. These plump little animals were not dogs at all. They were rodents like squirrels who lived in holes underground. Arapaho boys spent long hours hunting prairie dogs. Black Spot hoped he could get one before dark. Then, like a good hunter, he would carry it back to the teepee for his mother to cook for supper. Usually prairie dogs were plentiful in the surrounding plains, but today none could be seen. After several hours of searching, Black Spot gave up and sat down on the riverbank. Just below him was a deep pool of water. Since he was hot and tired, he jumped in for a swim. While he splashed and played, another hour passed by. At last, Black Spot started back for the Arapaho camp. He broke into an easy run, remembering how far he had to go. Mile after mile, his thin little legs propelled him on. Then, as day faded, he came to the top of a prairie swell that looked down on the village. Black Spot stopped with a jolt and gasp. The Arapahos and their teepees were gone. The boy could scarcely believe his eyes. Where was his family? Where had his people gone? Why had they left so quickly in the few hours he was away? Black Spot raced down the sandy flat. He wanted to be sure he had come back to the right place on the river. Yes, there were black fire pits and the circles of holes punched in the ground by the teepee poles. This was the campsite, all right. A chill went down his spine. He felt a tiny flicker of fear. Then he brushed it aside. Like a good Arapaho, he began figuring out what to do. His first thought was that game had been found south of the Cimarron, and that the camp had packed up and set out in that direction. But when he looked, Black Spot could find no trail left by a moving village. He found such a trail going north, however. That was bad news. It could mean only one thing. Their scouts had discovered enemies nearby, and the Arapaho elders had decided to lead the tribe back the way they had come only a few days before. In the bustle and confusion of leaving, Niesa and Neina might have been unaware that their son was missing from the village. Black Spot had told no one he was going prairie dog hunting. Now he very much regretted his mistake. Day was ending. As tired as he was, Black Spot felt eager to start running after the retreating village, but he knew as soon as darkness fell, he would not be able to see the trail. Better to crawl in the willow thicket by the river and sleep. At the first light of dawn, he would set out. With luck, he would soon meet some of his people returning to look for him. Almost at once, the weary little boy fell fast asleep. A lone coyote barked at the stars. Black Spot awoke early in the morning, hungry and thirsty. He had nothing to eat, but he crept down to the riverbed and took a long drink from the pool. Just as he got back to the willow thicket, he heard the pounding of horses' hooves. Looking across the Cimarron, his blood froze. Riding straight towards him was a large party of strange Indians carrying weapons and wearing war paint. Without being told, Black Spot knew they were the enemies of his people. At once he threw himself on the ground and crawled into a dense pocket of weeds and willows. The strangers on horseback rode right through the thicket. They passed so close to the trembling Black Spot that he could smell the sweat of their horses. But he was well hidden and no one saw him. The riders stopped on the sandy flat beyond to study the fire pits and teepee circles. Then they galloped north, following the path of the Arapahoes. Peering from the willow bushes, the boy watched them disappear over the edge of the plains. But a few moments later, he had a scary thought. Those men are in front of me now. I can't follow the trail to find father and mother. Black Spot was stuck on the Cimarron with no place to go. The Arapaho boy remained in hiding throughout the day, growing hungrier by the hour. Who were these enemies, he wondered? Kiowas? Apaches? One thing he was sure about. They were not Pawnees. Once he had seen several Pawnees raiding the Arapaho horse herd. All had shaved heads. The enemies he had glimpsed today wore long hair. It grew late. Dark shadows stretched over the land. Sun father dipped below the western horizon. Troubled and fearful, Black Spot prepared to spend his second night alone on the Cimarron. Not knowing what else to do, the boy stayed where he was. He believed that sooner or later his father would come for him. If he moved on, Niesa might never find him. Soon the hunger in Black Spot's belly turned to a dull ache. By the third day, he felt only weakness. Finally, he began to have visions, seeing things that were really not there. Several times he believed he was riding a pony over the plains. He came to his teepee standing alone and went inside. There his mother had a pot of antelope stew bubbling on the fire. But every time the hungry boy reached for the stew, the vision disappeared, and suddenly he was by himself again on the Cimarron. After 7 days, Black Spot no longer had visions. He was too weak to even go down for water. He couldn't even tell day from night. Life seemed to be slipping away. Death was looking for him. He would soon be on his way to the spirit world. The tall man named Tom Fitzpatrick roamed widely across the western plains and mountains. He made his living as a trapper and Indian trader. All mountain men and most Indians knew his name. In the spring of 1831, he had joined a wagon caravan leaving Independence, Missouri. Merchants in the caravan were taking trade goods over the long Santa Fe Trail to New Mexico. Weeks later, the wagons crossed a scorched brown plain in the far corner of Kansas. Tom Fitzpatrick rode ahead, Hoping to find water in the Cimarron River, he did discover the shallow pools that the Arapaho had recently been using. He found something else that quite surprised him. "Well, what on earth do we have here?" exclaimed Tom Fitzpatrick. He was looking down at the small, still figure of an Indian boy lying in a weedy willow thicket. The tall man took his canteen from the saddle horn and stepped down from his horse. He wet a red handkerchief and rubbed the cool cloth on the child's forehead. Black Spot's eyelids fluttered open. Startled, he looked into the large white face above him. At first he thought he had died and gone home to the home of the Sun Father. But then the man lifted his head and gave him a long drink. He asked Black Spot what he was called in the name of his tribe. The questions were made with hands, using the Indian sign language. The language was known to all of the Plains people. Black Spot understood perfectly, but being afraid, he made no reply. The white man placed a small piece of dried antelope meat in his mouth, and the boy chewed it slowly. He swallowed. Exhausted, his eyes closed again, and he knew nothing more for several hours. When Black Spot awoke late in the afternoon, he was startled to find himself lying in some kind of a large wooden box. White cloth arched over the top of his head, shutting out the sky. He had never seen a covered wagon before. Indeed, he had not seen a white man until today, although Black Spot at times had heard his father speak of them. Now he thought of the one who had found him on the riverbank. This tall man, as he named him in Arapaho, surely meant him no harm. The large wagon train from Missouri had parked in a circle next to the Cimarron. At the campfire, Tom Fitzpatrick stirred a big pot of rich soup. A couple of the bearded wagon drivers joined him at the fire. "Well, Tom," he said, "looks like that starving boy you brought in this morning is going to have a mighty fine dinner." "Yes," agreed Fitzpatrick, "this meat soup should be just the thing to make him strong again." "Did you find out his name, Tom?" the other drivers asked. "He wouldn't or couldn't tell me," was the reply. "But since we have to call him something, I'll name him Friday. That's what today is." Later, Black Spot gobbled down bowl after bowl of thick soup. Tall man stood beside him and spoke words that the boy did not understand. "So, young Friday, we have no choice. You'll travel with me for a while. Maybe up the trail somewhere we can learn where you belong." The Arapaho lad, now known as Friday, wondered what was about to happen to him. For sure, his life had turned onto a strange path. The following morning, Tall Man found a tough little pony for Friday to ride. The wagon train hitched up its mules and began moving over the trail, and a small Indian boy's pony trotted along. Friday was happy to be alive and no longer hungry. For 3 weeks, the wagons rolled steadily towards the southwest. The plains were left behind. Blue mountains rose on the skyline ahead. Friday was enjoying himself. Each morning he jumped from his blankets and ran to help with the camp chores. The mule drivers let him join in hitching the animals to the wagons. They joked and laughed as they worked. Friday soon lost his fear of white men. One day, Tall Man said to the boy, "Well, young fellow, you seem mighty happy now. I just wish I knew where you came from." This time he got an answer. With the fist, Friday tapped his chest near the heart. Tall Man smiled, for he recognized that sign. Friday was an Arapaho. When the wagons finally rumbled into Santa Fe at the end of the trail, Friday was filled with curiosity. The sights and sounds of the town with its streets and adobe houses and crowds of people amazed him. It was all so different from his own teepee village. The Indian boy did not have long to observe and explore. A few days after their arrival, Tall Man saddled his horse and put a bridle on Friday's pony. They rode out of Santa Fe, headed for Taos, 75 miles away. Crossing over the mountains, the pair reached Taos in 3 days. Friday noticed at once that the place was smaller than Santa Fe, and he saw white men there who were dressed in buckskin clothes, almost like Indians. Pointing to the men, Tall Man told him, "Those are fur trappers. We call them mountain men." "I wish Niesa and Naina were here with me," Friday thought to himself. He wanted to share with them everything he was seeing. Tom Fitzpatrick had business here in Taos. He was putting together a trading expedition. His plan was to carry supplies on muleback up the Rocky Mountains and trade them to trappers for furs. Since Tall Man was busy, Friday got the chance to look around. In the open square, or plaza, at the center of Taos, he watched horsemen, wagons, and ox carts go by. Long-eared donkeys, with stacks of firewood piled on their backs, waited patiently until a customer bought the wood from their owners. A few Indians came and went as well. Some were Pueblos who lived nearby. Others were Utes whose camps lay in the distant mountains. Knowing that the Utes were enemies of his people, Friday decided, "I'd better not let them see me." At last, Tall Man was ready to travel. He had hired helpers to pack the mules each day and to handle animals on the long trail north. The mountain men he knew would be waiting for the beaver traps he brought them, along with blankets, shirts, knives, gunpowder, hatchets, salt, sugar, and everything else they needed. Friday was glad to be leaving Taos. He had spent his life on the plains with his family. Now starting back into open country with Tall Man, he happily sang aloud an Arapaho hunting song. "Hi-ya, I will go with my bow and arrows. Hi-ya-na, I ride my pony looking for buffalo. Hi-ya-ya." The long mule train, guided by Tom Fitzpatrick, made its way north along the foot of the Rockies. On the right, the plains stretched eastward to the horizon where Sunfather rose each day. One afternoon they suddenly came to a stream of cold water rushing from the mountains. Friday let out a whoop. "I know this place," he shouted to the wind. "My people often camp here." Then he grew sad. Not a single teepee could be seen anywhere. Friday and the white men rode past a lone hill near the stream. Tall Man called it Huerfano Butte. They were now in central Colorado, the traditional range of the Arapahoes, but the lack of rain and poor hunting had driven them away. A week later, the Fitzpatrick party crossed into Wyoming and soon found the mountain men. The trading for furs took only a short time. Friday helped Tall Man lay out on the ground the knives, traps, blankets, and everything else. The mountain men brought beaver skins they had trapped. They used the skins like money to buy the goods they needed. To each one, Tall Man asked the same question. "Have you heard of an Arapaho family that's lost a boy?" But no one had. When the training was done, Tall Man Fitzpatrick paid off his helpers. Then he and Friday started overland for St. Louis, far to the east. By now, young Friday had learned many words in English. He could speak with Tall Man in simple sentences, using sign language less and less. One day he asked Tall Man, "Why are we going to this white man's village, St. Louis?" And Tom Fitzpatrick answered, "Well, my friend Friday, I'm putting you in school there. You will learn many useful things and will be well cared for until I can find your parents." Friday, the Arapaho, had no idea what school was, but he would soon find out. Weeks later, Tall Man and Friday reached the little town of Independence on the Missouri River. They put their horses out to pasture on a nearby farm and then walked down to the river landing. There was a steamboat tied up to the dock. Two large pipes in the center of the boat belched black smoke into the air. Of all the things Friday had seen recently, this was the most frightening. Tall Man took his hand and they went on board. "Don't be afraid, little man," he said. The floating house cast off and moved into the river current. The man and the boy stood at the rail watching the tree-lined shore drift by. Friday enjoyed his ride so much he soon forgot his fear. 6 days later, the steamboat arrived in St. Louis. Fitzpatrick led the boy ashore, and they began walking through the noisy streets of the city. Friday's eyes grew wide at the sight of so much traffic. There were fancy carriages, buggies, and delivery carts. People of all kinds hurried by on important errands. A few of them were Indians, but they looked nothing like Arapahoes. A half an hour's walk through Tall Man. A half hour's walk brought Tall Man and Friday to a great stone building surrounded by open space, grass, and trees. It was the school, a boarding school where students lived while going to class. Inside, they were greeted by a small man with a jolly face, dressed in black. He and Fitzpatrick stepped outside. He and Fitzpatrick stepped aside and talked for a while. Then Fitzpatrick gave the man a handful of gold coins. Tall Man said to Friday, "This will be your home for now. I will come back and see you in a few days." Then he left. Tom Fitzpatrick visited St. Louis men. Tom Fitzpatrick visited several St. Louis men involved in the fur trade. He paid off some old debts and brought new supplies for his next trip to the Rockies. At the end of the week, he returned to the school. The first thing he saw was Friday, running and kicking a ball with boys his age. Tall Man gave a signal, and Friday left the group and hurried to his side. Tall Man spoke slowly and signed with his hands too. He wanted to make sure the boy understood him. "Tomorrow I leave for the mountains," he said. "I won't be back for a year or more. I will be looking for your family, so you must remain here and wait for me." Friday nodded and then watched his friend disappear up the street. He suddenly felt lost and sad. It was the same feeling he had had on the Cimarron when his tribe had left him behind. Fitzpatrick did stay in the Rockies almost a year, but he never forgot about little Friday back in St. Louis. Black Spot's parents had not forgotten him either. As the Arapahoes wandered over the plains, his father asked everyone they met about news of his lost son. In time, Tom Fitzpatrick heard that a certain band of Arapahoes had a child missing. He felt sure that it was his Friday. One Sunday morning, Tall Man showed up on the steps of the St. Louis school. "I think I have found your people," he told the much-changed Friday. The boy now spoke perfect English, wore a school uniform, and had a white man's haircut. He had made friends, and at first was not eager to leave his new life. He and Tall Man had a serious talk. "Friday, you have learned valuable things here," said Fitzpatrick, "but now it is time to rejoin the Arapahoes." The boy grew sorrowful. Then he thought of his father, mother, and sister, and how much he missed them. That very night they left St. Louis for the West. That very night they left St. Louis for the West. 6 weeks passed. A much grown-up Friday rode a fine stepping horse next to Tall Man. Ahead of them, the grassy plains lapped up against the foot of the shining mountains, as the Indians called the Rockies. Suddenly, the riders came to a dip in the plain and looked down upon Arapaho teepees. Friday's heart almost stopped, he was so excited. There was his village, much as it had looked on the Cimarron when he last saw it long ago. He caught a glimpse of his family's teepee. The large horse herd grazed close by. Dogs barked. Friday smelled the familiar wood smoke from the cooking fires. Niesana and Naina both caught sight of the strange boy coming towards them on a prancing horse. In another moment, they recognized their own Black Spot. Joy swept over Friday. A lump rose in his throat, and tears clouded his eyes. In a high voice, he yelled in Arapaho, "I am home at last!" Black Spot, where shinin' Friday. Friday grew up to become an important man among the Arapahoes. As a warrior chief, he attended the famous council in Wyoming that led to Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Tom Fitzpatrick was there, and the two friends had long talks. In later years, Friday struggled to keep his people at peace with the white men. By 1878, many of the Arapahoes were confined to the Wind River Reservation in western Wyoming. Black Spot, known as Friday, died in 1881, around the age of 59. He was greatly missed because at the time of his death he was the only Arapaho who spoke English. No white men could speak the Arapaho language.